Hello and welcome back. I'm really glad you're here. This week, we are talking about week 2 of summer camp. So we just wrapped up week 2 as I'm recording this. And so I want to share with you guys everything that happened during week 2, all the ups, all the downs, the weird weather we had, just everything that has gone on, just like I did last week for week 1. So that you can get a better idea of what all goes on at camp, what kinds of kids are here at Starfish Social Club, how I respond to things that happen, what our kids are learning and doing, and also some of the amazing growth opportunities that happen along the way. Monday, let's see, I have to write notes because there's so much going on and there's so many things I want to talk about. And so I write them, I try to remember to write them down throughout the day so that I can remember them and come back to them. Week 1, one of my campers had this little USB powered fan and it was on a lanyard around his neck. And so basically he could turn it off and on whenever he wanted to. And he brought it because we go to the playground every day and we are in Texas. A couple of the other kids really liked this fan. And I made a comment to his mom about how I felt like having the fan really helped him be able to advocate for himself, because when other kids would ask him if he could use it, he could say either yes or no. And I felt like that was a really good opportunity for him. Also, what I noticed is that when he would let someone else use it, he would take the initiative to ask for it back when he was ready to have it back, which again, I felt like was a really good opportunity for this particular student. I think that's something that he really benefits from, is being able to ask for things, being able to, just kind of say yes or no to different things that people may be asking him. So I was talking to his mom about that, and she brought a fan for everybody at the beginning of week 2. So I had fans for everybody at Starfish Social Club, which was so amazing and so thoughtful. So I had them in Starfish. So when the kids come in, they can take one if they want one, and then we go to the park. We leave for the park right when camp starts. We are walking out the door when camp starts. So if students are late, they need to meet us at the park because that's where we will be. So one kiddo got dropped off after we had already left the building. And so when he saw that everybody had a fan but him, he got really upset about that, which is absolutely understandable. He was literally the only kid that didn't have a fan because everyone else had chosen to take one when we were still in the building. So absolutely understandable that he was upset about being the only person without having a fan. What he chose to do was spend the entire time at the playground sitting on the bench being upset about not having a fan, and following me around making comments to me about, I guess I just don't ever get to have a fan. I guess I'll have to tell my mom to buy me my own fan. I guess I'm just going to be the only kid without a fan. So just kind of following me around, repeating things like this. One time he even he said my name and I turned and looked at him, and he put his finger in the corner of his eye and pulled it down his face like it was a tear going down his face. And so I just reminded him it is absolutely okay to be upset about that. It is very understandable that you are upset that you don't have a fan and everybody else is. It is totally okay to be upset about that. And I said, my concern is that you're spending your whole playground time sitting on the bench when you could be spending your playground time playing. I said, you can be upset and play. You can do both of those things. And so that's what I would really love to see you do, is spend your playground time playing, because being upset about not having a fan doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't make anything better. but you can go play and at least you would feel better about it. And then tomorrow you'll have a fan. So I do notice with this kiddo in particular that he will definitely do that when he's upset, is he will choose to kind of sit in his upsetness instead of being able to do whatever we're doing that's fun. It actually happened a few more times this week as well. So that's one of my targets with him, is to help him recognize it's always okay to feel the way that you feel, but you can feel that way and go do something fun instead of just sitting out and being upset about it. You can be disappointed, you can be frustrated and still go play. So we're working on that with this kiddo. Our activity for Monday is we did a drawing activity, and this one is definitely more advanced in terms of cognitive flexibility. This one's definitely more up there. So I had all the students, I usually don't tell them what the challenge is until once we get started, because I don't want anybody to decide right away that they can't do it or don't want to do it. So game time, art, building, whatever it is that we're doing, I have them start first, and then I tell them the challenge once we're already started. So what I had the kids do on Monday was I gave everybody a piece of paper, and I put the timer for 5 minutes, and they have 5 minutes to draw whatever they wanted to. The only expectation with art is that it's something appropriate. So we don't draw weapons, we don't draw things about death. Even one of the kids said, nothing about poop. So yeah, we just draw things that are appropriate for where we're at. That's really the only expectation. They can use regular pencils, colored pencils, whatever. So everybody starts drawing. And then when the timer went off after 5 minutes, I had everybody pass their paper to the person sitting next to them. Some of the kids who've been in Starfish know that this is a thing that we do, so they have no problem with it. The kids who are new, I always expect at least one kiddo to have a hard time with this, because this is a hard thing to do. Number one, you have to stop drawing when the timer goes off. That's a hard thing to do. And then number two, you have to pass your paper to somebody else. It's a really big deal. I had one kiddo who melted down over it. Everybody else passed their paper, which I was surprised. It was just, everybody else seemed okay with it. Nobody else complained. Nobody else, seemed upset about it. This one kiddo got really upset. I think shortly before the timer went off, he got a little frustrated with what he was drawing, and he erased the whole thing to start over. So when the timer went off, he had very little drawn on his paper. And I think that was more of a challenge for him than me asking him to pass his paper. I think he just got really overwhelmed because his turn was up and he had almost nothing drawn. So I think that was really what the challenge was for him. So he ended up throwing his paper on the floor and getting really loud. I think he started crying. He was yelling. And he threw a pencil, not at anybody, not at the group. He actually threw it the other way toward the wall. And so just, again, it's always okay to feel the way you feel. It is okay to be really frustrated about this. That is okay. And I said, but if you want to stay with the group, I have to make sure that everybody's safe. So if you throw pencils, you might need to go hang out in another room for a bit, because I have to make sure that everybody's safe. And so that was really the end of kind of the bigness of his reaction. After that, he came back to the table and he sat with the group. He did not pick up his paper. He did not draw anything else. And so because he hadn't passed his paper, I had the other kids pass around him. So he didn't have a paper to draw on unless he chose to get his paper off the floor. But that situation passed really quickly. this is the same kiddo who had the challenge with the marbles from week 1. So the fact that it passed so quickly, I thought was amazing, because it didn't pass quickly with the marble situation from the week prior. So we did this every 5 minutes. They would pass their paper to the next person, pass, until everybody got back to their own drawing. And then they were able to spend 5 minutes adding whatever they wanted to their own drawing. The kids did a really good job with this. And what happens is, sometimes with almost every activity we do, sometimes there are kids who don't want to, say they don't want to, don't really like that modality. And so, as I mentioned last week, it's always an option to not do something. You don't ever have to do anything, but this is what we're doing. So if you're not doing this, you can just hang out and be with the group. So almost every time, what happens is it's much less boring to actually do the activity. And so that was a couple of the kids I noticed had chosen to not participate, but then after a couple passes, they started playing along, because otherwise you're just kind of sitting there being bored. So I did notice that by the end of it, everybody who was passing was participating and drawing and adding on. And at some point, the kiddo who was not participating crawled on the floor and got his paper and started drawing again. So again, that's an amazing, amazing outcome, that we're able to move on from being so upset. He was really upset about it. And so the fact that he's able to move on from that is amazing. And it's exactly why we're here, so that we can work on things like that. Because of the population that's at Starfish Social Club, when there are big situations like that, when kids yell, when they throw things, when they cry, it's not like how it might be in a school setting or in a club with a bunch of neurotypical kids, where our kids might tend to be ostracized because of things like that. That doesn't happen at Starfish Social Club, because almost everybody who's there can relate to that. I mean, even if they've never been the kid to yell or to, fall on the floor, they've been the kid who's been really upset about something at some point. So I do find that dynamic really awesome as well, that the kids don't, for the most part, it's very rare for kids to be rude or disrespectful to somebody who's having a hard time. It does happen. And I mentioned last week how one of the kids was, making comments about it, but it's actually really rare that that happens, because we've all experienced that before. And so I think my students just perceive that differently than kids who don't experience things like that. Oh, because everybody did so well with the art activity, I actually ended it early. I pointed out to the one kiddo how proud I was of him for coming back and doing it. I pointed out to everybody else how proud I was of them for doing it, even if it was hard and even if they didn't really want to. And so we wrapped up the activity early and started game time early. So we had extra game time. The game time challenge for Monday, because every week we have new kids that weren't there the week before. So the game time challenge for Monday was to play with someone that you haven't played with before. And in a new week, that's pretty easy to do because there are new kids. So everybody kind of found their partners pretty easily. And so we got started with game time. One of the things that happened during game time is 2 kids were playing Sorry. And I think one of them hadn't played before, because when he got a Sorry card, he didn't know what to do with it. So I explained to him how with a Sorry card, you take one of your pawns from your start and you can knock out the other player's pawn, anyone that's on the board, and then their pawn goes back to their start and your pawn takes their place. So he did that. He knocked out the other person's pawn and put his pawn there. Very shortly afterward, the other student got a Sorry. So at this time, the student who had the sorry first had 2 pawns on the board. The other student obviously wanted to knock out the pawn that would give him the best advantage. And the student who was getting knocked out physically refused to let him take that pawn. He had his hands over it. He physically refused to let the other kid knock that one out. And so I asked him about it, and he said that he wanted him to knock out the other piece. But the kid who had the sorry didn't want to knock out the other piece. He wanted to knock out, the piece that he wanted to knock out. And I asked him if he was willing to knock out the other piece, and he said no. So I talked to the kiddo who was holding his piece hostage, and I reminded him that when he had sorry, he was able to knock out whichever piece he wanted to, and that's what this other kid was able to do too, that the same rules apply to everybody. This is a common situation, is that kids want to make a new rule when it applies to them, right? So I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with that. And so this is basically what he was trying to do. He wanted to be able to tell the other kid which piece he could knock out. So he was getting a bit upset about it. The other kid was really calm about it. And so I said, I think we may be at a point where you either let him knock out the piece he wants, or you stop playing the game, because I don't, you were able to knock out his piece, but now you're not letting him choose your piece. And then the other kid said, well, what if instead of me knocking out his piece, what if he just has to go around the board an extra time? I thought that was a really cool suggestion. I thought that was a really creative suggestion. And I thought it was neat that kiddo came up with that as an alternative. And so I repeated it to the kiddo who was holding on to his piece. And I said, oh, he's offering that he'll leave your piece alone. You just have to take it around the board an extra time. I said, oh, I think that's a great suggestion. And he said, no, he was not willing to do that. So he was not willing to let the student knock out the piece he wanted to. He wasn't willing to go around the board again. He ended up just saying, I quit, and leaving the game. So the kid who was his partner ended up just going and playing a game with a different group. One of the things I noticed with him when he went to go play a game with a different group is he ended up playing Connect 4 with somebody. And I heard at one point the other kid say, oh, I got 4 in a row. And he said, I know. Which is actually, we have a lesson on those 2 words, I know, because kids, this isn't, nothing I talk about is just about kids, if we haven't figured that out already. But people who do that, people who say, I know, in response to something that somebody else is saying, is trying to show that they already know things. Like it's a way to try to have a reputation for being smart. It's like other people don't know more than you do. So sometimes people use I know when somebody's telling them new information as a way to make it not seem like that's something they didn't already know. I see that sometimes when kids are talking about their specific interests. Like, for example, somebody may be talking about whales and sharing some really factual information about whales, and another kid will be like, oh yeah, I know. Even though there's no way they knew that already, unless they were also fascinated with whales. So that's one way that people do it, is when somebody's sharing factual information and they try to make it seem like they kind of know everything. The other way that I see people do it is when someone gives them feedback. So for example, if someone says, hey, you're sitting too close to me. Oh, I know. Or, hey, I asked you to take the trash out 5 minutes ago. I know. Okay, so those are the 2 ways that I see people use I know, but either way, it's refusing to accept something. Basically, it's refusing to accept that you didn't know something already, or it's refusing to accept that somebody's having to give you feedback. And so in the lesson that we have coming up in August, we talk about how I know does not give you a reputation for being smart. It makes other people not want to talk to you anymore. If they're trying to talk to you about something and you just keep telling them you already know, it makes them want to go find someone else to talk to. So a lot of kids use that as a way to try to seem smart, but that's not what it accomplishes. It does not accomplish giving them a reputation for being smart. So I noticed this kiddo doing that, and I mentioned it to him. I said, if you knew that he had Connect Four, you would already know that he had won. And then when I kind of said that, he got a little embarrassed. He got a little red. But I think, just proving the point with him that, and I think I said, what is something else you could say when somebody wins a game? And then he paused for like 3. You could tell he really didn't want to go there. But then he finally looked at the other kid and said, good job. So that was another moment because I could tell he really didn't want to. But then he told the other kid, good job. So that was a really big deal. Another thing that along similar lines, we talk about this as well. I think in the same group of lessons about having a reputation for being smart, the opinions are not right or wrong. Somebody's opinion about something is not right or wrong. That's what an opinion is. It's what somebody thinks. It's what they believe. One of the kids had brought a book about mythical creatures. And in the book, one of the creatures was responsible for the weather. And it was we were coming up on having a couple days of a lot of rain because there's a tropical storm hitting Mexico. So we were talking about that. So this kiddo was saying that it was this mythical creature. And another kiddo said, well, weather comes from nature. Rain comes from nature. And the kiddo that was talking about the mythical creature said, no, it's from, and then he said the name of the creature. So I pointed out how nobody's opinion is wrong. You may have a different opinion, but that doesn't mean that their answer or their information or their ideas are wrong. It just means they're different. And so you can always share your opinion, but we try to do it without saying that somebody else is wrong. We try to do it without saying no or actually, because they're opinions. I did point out how weather is nature. That's scientific, right? Weather is nature. And mythical creatures, the word myth is in mythical creatures. And so we did have that conversation that if we're really going to have a fact-based conversation about weather, it comes from nature instead of mythical creatures. But again, that doesn't mean we have to tell somebody no. That doesn't mean we have to assert that they're wrong and we're right. We can both believe whatever we want to believe about where weather comes from. Oh, that was on Tuesday because that was when we were getting ready for all the weather. So on Tuesday, this is kind of counterintuitive, but one of the things that I know is that the less kids I have, the more chaotic it is. This is pretty counterintuitive, but this has played out time and time again. I believe that it's because the more kids that are there, the more options kids have for who to talk to, who to play with, who to hang out with. The more people that are there, the more likely there are to be other people they have something in common with. Even, for us, if you think about if you go to a party and there's 100 people there versus a party and there's 20 people there, it just limits your options in who you can talk to, who you can hang out with, etc. So one of the days this week, I had 3 kids that weren't able to make it, which took our group from a large group to a medium group. And I immediately knew it was going to be a challenging day because we had a smaller group than we're used to. And it definitely was. It was definitely a challenging day. So I think sometimes it's actually easier to manage everything going on when there's more kids. Again, it sounds really counterintuitive. Last year, there was a day at camp when Ramiro was working with me where we had 17 kids. And we were actually like, yeah, it's not a big deal. It's much easier to manage when there's more kids because they have other people to interact and engage with. When there's a small group of kids, they just kind of get bored with each other quickly. They don't have as many options. Okay, I think I've said that in enough ways so far. So that was one of our days this week that happened. One of the activities I gave the kids this week the day that we did Legos, was before I didn't even tell them we were doing Legos yet. I didn't tell them anything. I went around the group and asked everybody to tell me the name of a color. It just had to be a basic color, not an off the wall color. So everybody told me the name of a color. And then I went and got the Legos and I gave everybody pieces that were only the color that they had told me. So obviously they didn't know that we were even building, or they didn't know that that's what we were going to do. But I gave them only the colors that they had told me. And so I had a lot of Legos. It took me a while to kind of pick through and find colors for everybody. So I basically just kept walking around the group in a circle. And every time I went around, I would give every student maybe 5 Legos that I had found in their color. And then I would make my way around the circle, dropping off Legos, and make my way around again. And then after I felt like everybody had a decent amount, I went around and gave everybody a minifig, a little person, a Lego person. So they could build anything they wanted to, but those were the only Legos they had, were the colors that they gave me. This was so amazing. Some of the kids challenged themselves to use all of their pieces. So they maybe had 20, 25 pieces by the end of it. Some of them challenged themselves to use all of their pieces. And I was really impressed by the things that they built with using all of their pieces because they didn't have any cohesiveness. I was literally just digging through the bin and pulling out what I found that matched their color. So there's no sets, there's no cohesiveness. They were just random pieces. Some of the kids just used certain pieces. I think, one of the kids who wasn't so into building just used certain pieces and made something that made her happy. But everybody made something. And then everybody got to share with the group what they had made because we're working on being able to talk in front of a group. We're working on being able to share information. We're working on listening to other people as well. Everybody got to share what they had made. And then I always try to do about 35, 40 minutes of structure and then 15, 20 minutes of free. So after we got done with everybody doing the challenge, then they could build whatever they want to. Then I just kind of dumped the Legos on the table and they could build whatever they wanted to. That day, on Tuesday when we went to the park, the weather was changing because of the tropical storm that was coming. And so it was a bit cooler, which was, for us, it's really nice. It was 10 to 15 degrees cooler than it normally is. Normally it's in the 90s. So that was really nice. And we got to see animals that we normally don't see. Usually during summer camp, we will see deer in the park 2 or 3 times. We saw a baby deer and its mom. So the kids were really excited about that, as was I. I love animals. And one of the kids was so excited that he was yelling. And so it was a great opportunity for me to talk to the kids about being quiet and respectful of animals. We also saw some lizards, and one of the kids was trying to catch them. So again, a conversation about how animals don't like it when we try to catch them and touch them unless they live in our house. And even then, sometimes they don't like it. But animals that live outside don't like people trying to touch them and catch them. So one day, one of the kids had picked up a roly-poly. I don't know if everybody calls it that. Here we call them roly-polies, pill bugs, doodle bugs. And I just kept reminding him, he doesn't want to be picked up. He doesn't want to be in your hand. He wants to be on the ground. That's where he lives. So I really try to foster a respect for nature and for the creatures. We also saw a skunk, which was so weird. By the time when we saw it, we were so close to it that I cannot believe we didn't scare it. We were so close. We were probably 2 feet from it. Fortunately, I saw it first. I have this amazing sense for seeing animals in the wild. So I saw it first, and my immediate reaction was to have everybody move. And after we all moved, then I took some pictures of it, which didn't come out very well because it had started to walk off by then. But we were so close to it. And the kids were really excited. Most of them said they'd never seen a skunk before, unless it was, in the road, not with us anymore. So they were really excited about being able to see the skunk. And we talked about how we give it space, because if we scare it, it's going to make us stinky. But also, we don't want to scare it. This is its home, and we are visiting, and we don't want to scare it. We talked about how if we pick flowers or pull leaves, that we're damaging those plants, and that the things that we take are not going to survive. So we try to leave nature alone. We try to leave the animals alone. We just look at them and appreciate them. We try to leave the plants alone. So we had that conversation on Tuesday. That was really fun. I really like just being able to talk to the kids about anything and everything, just all kinds of different stuff. On Wednesday, we were not able to go to the playground because the rain had started. Wednesday, we got to talk a lot about weather and rain. I showed the kids on my weather app, the radar on my weather app. So I showed them how to look at the radar and what everything means. And we got to track the rain and see the rain on the radar. And every hour on Wednesday, because sometimes in the past, if we're not able to go right away, but we can go later, we'll go later. So every hour we would sit down and look at the radar and see if we were going to be able to go later. We weren't ever able to go. It pretty much rained all afternoon on Wednesday, so we weren't able to go. Aside from having a small group of kids, not being able to go to the park also makes the day challenging, because we don't have that hour where we are, number one, exercising, number two, out in fresh air, and number three, just doing something different. So the days that we can't go to the playground also are challenging days. I know this from experience. So I was mentally prepared going into Wednesday. So I added some new and some different activities. Instead of doing things for about 45 minutes to an hour, we were switching every 30 minutes or so, just to try to keep everybody engaged and involved. We ended up doing just a game that I totally made up on the spot to get some movement going. And so for game time on Wednesday, when we finished that activity, by default, about half the kids were on one side of the room and about half of them were on the other, because we've been playing a game where every student got to say something they like, and everybody who also likes it went to one side of the room, and people who didn't went to the other side of the room. And so that's what we were doing, just to get some movement. It also helps us learn more about each other. So when we had our last turn, the class was kind of naturally split in half. So I said, okay, today for game time, I want you to pick a partner from the other side of the room, because I noticed that they tended to separate. Kids who are more similar were on one side, and then the same kids who are similar to each other were on the other side. So I thought that would actually be perfect to have them partner across the room, because they're not the kids who normally partner together, and that's perfect. So I said, okay, I want you guys, find a partner from the other side of the room. And I went to get all the games out, and I could see and hear that nobody was moving. When things like that happen, I just wait. Because I know they heard me. I know they heard the expectation. If they didn't, they'll ask somebody. So I just wait. I've also done things like this when we have an activity that requires pencils and I purposefully don't put out pencils. I just wait. I just wait for someone to speak up. So finally, one kiddo went over to the other side of the room, not that far away, and asked another kid to be his partner. And there we go. Now we've finally got some movement going. So the people who pick partners first get a game first. It's reinforcement for, making decisions, picking a partner. So everybody got a partner from the other side of the room. Everybody picked their game. One student just sat back. didn't pick a partner, didn't find someone else to play with, which is a couple different things. Number one, it can definitely be social anxiety. It can definitely be worrying that no one is going to want to play with her. It can definitely be worrying somebody's going to tell her no, they don't want to be her partner. Sometimes kids want other people to come to it's almost like a power dynamic where they want someone else to approach them. They want someone else to pick them. And I think there was a little bit of both of those going on. But what happens is if you don't pick a partner, you just end up without a partner. And so that's what happened with her is she just ended up without a partner because everyone else took the initiative and found someone else to play with. So there was an even number of kids. One of the other kids had been kind of like bothering some of the kids. And so nobody wanted to be his partner during game time. And I use this as a big teachable moment for everybody. Nobody ever has to play with somebody else. I don't do that at all because I don't think that's realistic for real world social situations. I don't believe in making kids spend time, play, hang out with somebody that they don't want to. I don't know what benefit comes out of that. And if you have a kiddo who that's happening to because of the choices he's making, that kiddo needs to figure that out. That kiddo needs to be able to make that connection. And in my experience, they will always start to make different choices. So that's what happened today is there was an even number of kiddos, but one of the kiddos had been bothering the other kids and nobody wanted to be his partner. So I let them know when it was just the two of them left. I said, okay, you guys are the only two without a partner. So I said, you guys can be partners or you can choose not to. And she chose not to be his partner because he had been bothering people. So I reinforced both of those outcomes, right? One outcome is if you don't take the initiative to find a partner, you're going to end up without one. And if you're bothering people and not listening when they ask you to stop, you're going to end up without a partner. So they both ended up eventually joining other groups. The kiddo who was bothering kids at Starfish, the kids don't hold grudges. They don't stay upset with each other. So when he asked to go join another group, they were fine with him joining. I really rarely see that happen. I mean, sometimes kids don't like each other. That's absolutely normal. We talk about that in our year-round program. It's not even realistic to like everybody. That's not possible. So sometimes kids have other kids they don't prefer. They don't really want to play with them. But I very rarely see kids exclude somebody else because of their behavior. I hardly ever see that happen. So they both ended up having groups that they could play with. Always the way that game time works is we do structured game time for about 35 minutes, and then they can do marbles and tiles, which is 3 magic words. Forget please, forget thank you, forget I love you, marbles and tiles. Those are the magic words at Starfish Social Club. Everybody loves marbles and tiles. I don't know that I've ever met a kid who does not want to do that when it's time for marbles and tiles. But the expectation every single day is that you are doing game time, that you're with a partner, you're with a group, you're doing something. So I ended up on this day, this rainy day where we were stuck inside, with about half the kids out of the group by the end of game time. Some of them were just kind of wandering around. Some of them were just sitting on the floor, just out of the group. I've never had that many kids make that choice before to just kind of check out of game time. So I use a timer because the time is objective. It's not me saying, okay, time for marbles and tiles. It's the timer. The timer's in control of what happens next. So when the timer went off, only half the kids were in a group playing. And so I reminded everybody that if they weren't in a group playing, they weren't able to do marbles and tiles. Some of the kids got really upset. We had some tears, we had some yelling. Some of them got really upset. So the half who had been playing in a group put their game away, went off to go do marbles and tiles. I was really taken aback at how many kids had missed it. And so I gave them an opportunity. I said, you know what you guys can do? You can find a partner right now. You can play a game really quickly, and then you'll be able to do marbles and tiles before we go home, because it's the last thing that we do for the day. There were 5 kids who were in that situation, and 4 of them chose to take the second opportunity. So 4 of them, they broke up into groups of 2. They played the quickest game they could find, and then they were off to marbles and tiles. And that was that. Some of them were still upset. One of them, cried a little bit, but they made a different choice so that they could have a different outcome. And that's what I'm looking for. I had one kid, it was actually his first day at camp, and he wasn't having it. He got really upset, very upset. This is the day we did a writing activity on this day, and I let them draw a picture to go with what we had written about. And he came over to me with his picture and put his hands on it like he was going to tear it. And so I just said, that's your choice, but it's your picture. It's not my picture. So if you tear it, the only thing that happens is that you're tearing your picture. I said, it doesn't get you marbles and tiles. It doesn't, solve the problem. And then he tore it in half. And he looked at me. It was like he was, I think a lot of us are familiar with when we feel like a kiddo is trying to like hurt us, right? They're upset about something, so they're trying to make us upset, or they're trying to pass their hurt onto us. And that's definitely what I was feeling from him. So when he tore it, I said, did that make the situation better or worse? And he said, worse. So I said, okay, how could you make it better? And I pointed out there's a kiddo that he could have gone and played a game with. He just wasn't willing to. This was the rainy day. So I decided I really wanted this kid to have another chance. I hate ending a day with somebody not making a situation better. I really don't like that. I really wanted him to have another chance. So I ended up making our next activity shorter just so we could do marbles and tiles again before we went home. And I was very clear to everybody, we're going to do this activity, and everybody who participates in it can do marbles and tiles an extra time before we go home. So obviously the kids are super excited about that. Everybody participated except this kid, which it's so hard for me to see that happen. I do not avoid the short-term disappointment. I do not allow crying, throwing things, melting down to cause me to change my stance on something. So I can see that this kiddo's not participating. And so what's going to happen next is everybody else is going to go to marbles and tiles, and he's not going to be able to. I can see that this is happening, but I don't avoid the immediate behaviors. My goal is always to teach, and I'm not teaching anything positive or productive by allowing kids to manipulate situations because of the reactions that they're having. So I do not make decisions so that somebody doesn't melt down. For example, I don't do that. When I say what something is or what it's going to be, that's what it is or what it's going to be, even if somebody has a really big reaction to it. I always try to help kids through that. And I always try to provide opportunities for them to make it better and make a different choice. And that's exactly what I was trying to do with the second round of marbles and tiles. Is I honestly did it specifically for this one kid because I really wanted him to be able to try again. But that's not the choice that he made. And so sure enough, we finished the activity. Everybody else went to marbles and tiles and he didn't. And his reaction that time was even bigger. He was crying. He tore his picture into more pieces. He was telling me that it was my fault that he tore his picture, which just give you, some insight into how he thinks. He was really, really upset. And so we just had a conversation about what would get him marbles and tiles because that's what he was wanting. So if you want marbles and tiles, what could you do to get marbles and tiles? And he just was not open to that conversation at all. So unfortunately, I really, really hate sending kids home on that kind of note. Almost always we're able to regroup and get it together before we go home. Every once in a while we're not. And this was one of the days where he wasn't. And so it's kind of heartbreaking for me because I really wanted him to have a different outcome, but I'm not going to manipulate to make that happen. I need that to be because he has learned how to make different choices. So when I see him again, I'm really hoping that we can continue working on that. There are definitely times, especially for new students, where when they first come to Starfish, it is a lot because this is the kind of stuff we do. As I say, this is why we're here. So some kids go home having had a rough day or a rough week when they first start, because this is what we're doing. We're working on being more flexible, being more adaptable, being with a group, hanging out with other people. We've got personality conflicts. It's a group of almost exclusively autistic and ADHD kids. So if you think about your kiddo times 10, right? That's what it is. So sometimes when kids first come, it's hard. It is hard for them. Sometimes they're getting a lot of feedback from other kids, and that's hard for them. Sometimes they're missing out on things, and that's hard for them. Sometimes they're bothering people, and the other kids don't want to play with them. But as long as we keep coming and keep working, it always, always, always gets better. Always gets better. So that was Wednesday. That was our day where we weren't able to go to the playground. Thursday was iffy with the weather. Like I said, it's a storm system that was coming into Mexico. We also had a geography lesson because one of the kids said, well, aren't we on the other side of the country from Mexico? So when we were looking at the radar, we looked at the map too. So Thursday was iffy, but we were looking at the radar and we were able to go to the park at the beginning of camp. So we were able to have our normal schedule and routine at the beginning of camp. One of the things that happened at the park is one of the students I have who I realized really needs to feel in charge and in control, which is not uncommon, decided that when she was done playing, she was ready for everybody to leave the park. And she kept kind of, pestering me. When are we leaving? When are we leaving? I'm hot. I'm tired. I'm done playing. So again, it's on a timer. We're at the playground for a certain time. And when the timer goes off, that's when we get ready to go. So I don't just make it up. I don't just randomly decide, when we're going to leave. But I also had a conversation with her about how we're in a group. And it is not up to her to decide when she's done and wants to leave. We're all here in a group and everybody else was playing. So just pointing out to her that she's not in charge of what time we leave the playground. The timer is in charge of what time we leave the playground. And so she can be hot and tired and complain about not wanting to play, or she can go play. But either way, we're going to be at the playground till the timer goes off. So after we had that conversation, she didn't bring it up again. When we got back to Starfish and we were doing our activity, we were playing a game. We were playing a game, a memory and attention game that also had some movement built into it. And two of the kiddos were in different ways and at different times were bothering the rest of the group. One of them had chosen to just not participate in the activity, but then he was doing a lot of things to get people's attention. And at one point he started running around and like poking people. So then we had I stopped everything. We had a whole group discussion about how everybody in the world bothers people sometimes. We all bother people sometimes. And every time I have this discussion with a group of kids, it's one of our lessons that we have in August. Every time I have this discussion, at least one kid will say, I don't. But everybody does. We all bother other people. And so when the one kid, piped up and said, I don't, I pointed out an example of when they did. And then I pointed out examples of when I've bothered other people. And I joke with the kids and say, you guys probably get really annoyed with me sometimes. We all bother and annoy other people, even if we don't mean to. It's because all of our brains are different and we all get bothered by different things. So then we talked about how to ask people to stop, because several of the kids default to things like stop it or cut it out or quit it. So we talked about how you can say, can you please stop doing that? So the kids were practicing doing that. Can you please stop doing that? And then one of the kids wouldn't stop when the kids were asking him to. So we talked about how, what do you think you're expected to do if somebody asks you to stop doing something? But it's very different to have that conversation versus seeing it play out in real life. Because when the kids see it play out in real life, every one of them can picture themselves in that kid who's doing it. And so it makes it much more real and much more valid and important when they can all picture themselves being that kid who's not stopping. It also gives them a little bit more empathy toward that kid. So we had that conversation. We were able to work through that. This time I had the kids form groups of 4. And what I did, this was another pretty high level challenge for game time, is I had them all pick a game and set the game up. And then the challenge was that everybody got to make a new rule for the game. When I do this, sometimes what happens is that the rules conflict with each other. Sometimes what happens is that the rules make it impossible to play the game. But this is the challenge. Everybody gets to make a new rule. One of the groups did really well with it. It was actually the younger group. They did really well with it. The older group struggled a lot for a lot of different reasons. The first thing that I noticed is that they were arguing with the rules the other kids were coming up with. And so I intervened and said, everybody gets to make a rule. So you don't get to argue with the rule that somebody else makes. Everybody gets to make their own rule. And so we were able to move past that. One of the kids, so then they started playing, the older group was playing Sorry. And which reminds me, the kiddo who on Monday quit playing Sorry because he didn't want his piece knocked out, on Tuesday played Sorry again and tolerated his piece being knocked out. So forgot to add that in the mix, that's huge from one day to the next. On Monday, he quit the game. And on Tuesday, he tolerated it and kept playing. So huge just in 24 hours. So this group of 4 was playing Sorry. They had all made up their own rules. One of the kids, I had a couple kids this week who always want to be right. Always will kind of argue things, always want people to, listen to their perspective and their opinion. And so one of the kids just kind of kept arguing with everybody about the rules, about moving. And one time the group was having a discussion. They were getting a little bit loud, but they were having a discussion about the rules because now things are gray. Things aren't black and white anymore. And one of the kids put his hands over his ears and he yelled, "Stop it!" And the whole group stopped. They got silent. And two of the kids looked at him and said, "Why are you screaming?" Which I thought was a really interesting response. And so I just waited to see what would happen. And so they said, "Why are you screaming?" And he said, "Well, you guys are yelling and arguing." And the other kid said, "No, we're not." He said, "We're having a discussion about the rules." And there was about a 3-second pause. And then they went back to having their discussion. They did do it quieter. They went back to having their discussion. And the kiddo who was upset, I wasn't sure what he was going to do. He stayed in there. And I think it was a really important moment for him that yelling doesn't make things better and that his reaction didn't solve anything. And so I think I really prefer to let kids work stuff like that out between them because their interactions are much more important than me interjecting myself. So I think that worked out really well. As the time went on, one of the kiddos decided he was just kind of over it and he said he quit and he left the group. A little while later, the three that were still playing in that group, at one point, we're having a disagreement because of the gray rules. We're having a disagreement over what would happen next with one of the kids' moves. And so the one whose turn it was trying to advocate for one thing, and the other two kids were saying, "No, that's not the way it goes." But again, the rules are gray now. They're not black and white. So they were getting really heated. And so I intervened, and I really don't like doing majority rules because I like honoring what everybody thinks and feels. So typically what I'll do in group situations is we all have to come to an agreement on something. But because I knew these kids and I knew this situation, I knew that was not going to happen. I knew that these three kids were not going to come to an agreement because one of the kids on each side were the kids who had been kind of arguing and disagreeing, the whole week. So I knew that these three kids were not going to be able to come to an agreement. So I did interject and go with majority rules. And the kid who was in the minority got pretty upset about it. I mean, he was visibly upset. And so I just said to him, it's okay to be upset about this. I said, "Do you want to keep playing or do you want to go play something else?" And he chose to keep playing, which I think was a really big deal, that he chose to stay and keep playing. Even though he didn't get what he wanted, he didn't get what he thought he should get in that turn. He chose to keep playing. In the younger kids group, one of the things that they started doing, all the kids who were in that group are new to Starfish, because a tradition at Starfish is if there's a decision to be made and people can't agree, or if there's a tie to be broken, or if we're going to decide who's going to go first, the two ways that the kids really default to problem solving is rock, paper, scissors, or rolling dice. So at Starfish, if there's a problem that can't be solved, that's what they tend to do. And they do it on their own, the kids who've been coming for a while. These kids were all brand new and they started doing rock, paper, scissors to decide anytime they were playing a game called Spot It, where you have to match things and whoever sees the match first gets the cards. And so sometimes if two people would say it at the same time, they on their own started doing rock, paper, scissors to decide who would get the cards. So I thought that was really cool that they're younger and they were able to figure that out and do some problem solving on their own. End of the activity. I have a couple kids. I have the kiddo who quit the game ended up coming back later, but the kids had put his pieces away. He said he quit and he left and was gone for a while, and the kids had moved him off the board. So I think it occurred to him that he was going to miss marbles and tiles. So he came back later and tried to rejoin, but he wasn't even a part of the game anymore. So he was trying to kind of force himself back into the game. He was trying to make the other kids let him play and let him take a turn. And they didn't really care. They just kind of kept playing around him. But it was important to me to reinforce that he quit. He didn't go to the bathroom and come back. He didn't go take a break and come back. He told the group he quit and he walked away. So I said, usually when you do something like that, they're going to go on without you, and there's not a space for you when you come back. He got really upset about that. And then he removed himself from the group again. So when the timer went off for marbles and tiles, he was out of the group. And then he got really upset because he recognized what had happened, what was happening. There was another kid who had been out of game time the whole time. He got upset because I rotate the games on different days, so we're not playing the same ones over and over again. And the game he wanted to play was out of rotation that day. This is the same kid who chose to sit out of playground time because he was upset about the fan. He chose to sit out of all of game time because I wouldn't bring out the game that he wanted to play. So again, same conversation. It's okay to be upset that you don't have the game you want, but you're missing all of game time because of it. So now, not only has he missed game time, he's missed marbles and tiles. So I have two kids who are out this time, one of whom is very upset, crying. The other one's just mad at me because I wouldn't bring the other game out. I was able to Oh, and then I had the kiddo who had been running around poking everybody, who was just kind of out of the group to begin with. I had the three of them who all wanted to do marbles and tiles. Again, marbles and tiles is the magic. They wanted to do marbles and tiles, but they weren't able to because of the decisions that they had been making. So I offered, there were only 10 minutes left by the time we all got to this point. I offered if they could play one game together for 5 minutes, they could do marbles and tiles the last 5 minutes, and they all three did that. So we were able to end on Thursday with everybody doing marbles and tiles. So I was really glad that on Thursday we were able to end with everybody doing the magical marbles and tiles. And I think this was from last week. I only have one set of tiles and 2 sets of marbles. And when there's 10 kids, that means we all have to play with them together. You don't get to build your own thing. You don't get to do whatever you want because there's not enough pieces for that. Which reminds me, another thing that happened at the end of the day on Thursday is the kids that were building with the magnetic tiles, when they first started, they were just being silly and they were tossing tiles at whatever they were building to knock it down. But then I noticed one of the youngest kids was building and the older kids were throwing the tiles to knock it down. And I could tell by his face that he did not want them to do that, but he hadn't told them that. I think part of it is that he's young. I think maybe he felt a little bit intimidated. I think part of it is that he didn't maybe know that he could say that to them. So I just pointed out what was happening. I said, hey, I noticed that they're knocking this down, but you don't look like you want them to. I said, do you want them to? Because I don't ever want to assume that something is true because I don't know. And so I said, do you want them to knock it down? And he said, no. And I said, oh, you can tell them. You can say, please don't knock it down. And then he did. Then he felt comfortable saying it. And because I had been there to assist with that, they knew that, he was serious about it. We also talk about sometimes when kids are anxious, they'll give somebody feedback, but they'll do it while they're laughing or smiling. So for example, if he said, hey guys, please don't knock that down, they would probably keep knocking it down because that sounds like he's playing. It sounds like he's just pretending. So that's another thing is when we give people feedback, not to be mean or rude about it, but to be serious about it. Because that's usually when people are anxious about giving people feedback, they're trying to soften the feedback, but it usually doesn't let the other person understand that you're being serious about it. You're not being playful. if you think about kids running around and maybe playing tag and somebody doesn't want to play tag anymore, a lot of times what they'll do is continue running and laughing, but saying, please stop. I don't want to play anymore, until it gets to the point where they lose it. But this is a reason why sometimes is because they're giving feedback, but they're not doing it seriously. And so the other kids aren't taking it seriously. So that's another big thing with giving feedback, is we've got to say it in a way that shows that we mean it. One more thing about game time on Thursday. The younger kids, one of the kids was just better at the game than the other two kids were. And so she kept winning. And one of the kids came over and asked me if they could play a different game. They can always play a different game as long as the group agrees on what they're going to play next, or they can go join a different group. So it's always an option. But when he came to ask me that, she heard him and she said, will you keep playing this game if I go easier? And he said, yes. And I thought that was such a cool awareness on her part to recognize that he didn't want to play anymore because she kept winning. And it was cool on her part to offer to not win as much so that he would keep playing. So I thought that was really neat that they came to that agreement between them. And now I'm hoping that next time he's in a situation like that, he maybe can speak up and say something about it, right? That maybe that gives him the awareness to say something like that next time he feels like he's in a situation like that. So that was week 2 of Starfish Social Club Summer Camp. We had a couple challenging days, more so than usual. But again, this is why we're here. And I really love seeing the progression of kids who come week to week. During the school year, it's, month to month. I really love being able to see the things that last week were a challenge, that this week were less of a challenge. And so I'm excited for week 3, where I'll be able to see that even more. We have more new kids starting on week 3. So lots more adventures and good times to come. Thank you for being here. I am really glad you're here, and I'll see you again next week.